Hey, this is Chris Plush from CG Masters, and in this series what we're going to be doing is creating a combat knife game asset step by step from start to finish. And in this first part here we're going to be working on the high poly version of the model. Now we're going to start things off by changing something real quick in the user preferences. So let's go up to File, go down to User Preferences, and over in the Editing tab let's set Align to View instead of World. That's just going to make it so whenever we add an object, it's going to align that object to that particular view we're in. And this is something that I have as default, so it's just going to help you better follow along with these tutorials if you set it to that as well. And now let's click on Save User Settings, and we can close out of that. So now let's start things off by adding in a reference photo in the background. So let's press numpad 1 for front view, and then press the N key for the right side toolbar. Let's scroll down to the bottom and expand the background images panel, and then click on Add Image. Now let's click on Open, and go into wherever you saved your reference picture, knife front, and we'll load that in. So now we see it in the background in front view. Let's make sure it just displays in front view. So we'll change the axis from all views to just front. And now we'll turn the opacity down to 0.4 so it's a little bit more transparent. And let's rotate it as well. Let me drag that over. Let's change the rotation value to -90 so that it's standing straight up. Alright, now I'll press A once or twice until everything in the scene is selected. Then I'll press X and I'll delete everything. Alright, let me press N to get rid of the right side toolbar, and now we're ready to start modeling. So now let's press Shift and S and choose Cursor to Center to make sure the cursor is in the middle of the world. And now I'll press numpad 7 for top view, and let's add a circle in by pressing Shift and A, and then add a mesh circle. Now immediately press the T key for the left side toolbar. We're going to need this operator menu in the bottom left. And let's change the number of vertices to the number we want our final real-time model to have. So I'm going to change the number down to 20. And then I'll press T to get rid of that. And now let's tab into edit mode, and with all the vertices selected, we'll press numpad 1 for front view, and we'll start shaping the handle. So let me press S to scale that down to about right there. Then I'll press G, and I'll move that right into the center of the top of the handle right there. Then I'll press S and scale it down a little bit more to match the size. Now let me zoom out a little bit, and I'll press E to extrude, and then the Z key to constrain the extrusion to the Z axis. And we'll bring it all the way down to the thinnest part of the bottom of the handle there. We're going to handle just the bulbous part of this shape first, and then we'll work on creating the pummel at the bottom. Alright, now let's press the Z key for wireframe view, and now we need to add some edge loops in to match up with the 5 ridges in the handle. So I'm going to press Ctrl and R to add an edge loop, and I'll add it right through the middle right there, and then scroll up on the mouse until I have 5 cuts. And I'll left click and then right click to keep those new cuts in the middle. And now we need to shape this. So we're going to use something called proportional vertex editing. And what that tool does is when you move a selection, the vertices around it will also move along with it based on a fall off. Now we're going to scale things out from the center. So let's select that middle set of vertices by holding Alt and right clicking on that edge right there to select that whole loop of vertices. And now let's enable proportional vertex editing by pressing the O key. And now if we press S to scale that up, you can see the vertices around our selection are scaling along with it, but to a lesser degree the further away from the selection they are. So that's how this fall off works, and that's how this proportional vertex editing tool works. And we can change the fall off by using the scroll wheel on the mouse as well. Anything within that circle is going to be affected by this scaling. So let me right click to cancel that. So right now by default, in this menu down here, our proportional editing fall off is set to smooth. But that's not quite the shape we're looking for this bulbous handle. But as you can see from the icon of the sphere option, that's definitely more like the shape we're looking for. So let me click on sphere, and that's just going to give us a more bulbous shape when we go to scale this away. Now let's press S to start scaling this up, and you can see that things are scaling on the Z axis as well. We don't want those edge loops to move out of place vertically. So let me press Shift and Z, and that will lock the Z axis. So now we're just scaling on the X and Y axis. So use the scroll wheel on your mouse and increase the fall off to about right there, I think looks good. And scale up your vertices to about right there. I'm looking at the left side of the reference photo and trying to match that shape. Oh crap, I accidentally right clicked. Let me try that again. Shift and Z, and then I'll scale it to right there. All right, so scale your handle to right there, and then left click this time, not right click. All right, so that's looking good so far. Now we need to move each one of these edge loops down to meet up with the ridges in the photo. So let me press B, and then left click and drag over all of these vertices, and we're going to slide them down. But first let's turn off that proportional editing tool. So press the O key to turn that off. Now let me zoom into about right here so all the ridges are in view. Then I'll press G twice, and edge slide these down here to the middle of the top and bottom ridges like that, and then left click. And now let's scale this up by pressing S and then Z. Scale it up on the Z axis until each edge loop is aligned with its respective ridge, and then left click. All right, so that's looking good to me. Now you can see the bottom of the handle here gets a little bit thinner than the top. That's why these few bottom circles of vertices are out of alignment. So let me hold Alt, right click on the bottom edge there to select that loop. Then I'll press S to scale it in to about right there, just kind of eyeing up the scale, and then left click. Now I'll press G and move it on top of the photo just to see if it aligns, and that looks good to me. So I'll right click to move it back. But now we need to smooth out the bottom by scaling in the two edge loops above that a little bit. So let me hold Alt, right click on that one, press S to scale it in to about right there, and left click, and then we'll do the same thing with this. Scale that in until we have a nice smooth curve on the side. All right, so that looks like it's aligning a lot better. And so far, so good. So now let's pan down to the bottom and we'll work on the pummel. Let me hold Alt, right click on that edge loop there to select it. And let me move this up a little bit. I don't think it's quite at the lowest point in the pocket here. So I'll press G and then Z, move it up to about right there, and left click. And now let's press E to extrude it, and then press Z to constrain it to the Z axis, and we'll drop this right there. Now press S to scale it up. And we're gonna just eye this up at this point and try and match the shape of the photo in the background. So I'll left click right there. I think that looks about right. And now let's press E and then Z and extrude it down again to wherever the bottom of the pummel is, which is kind of hard to tell in the photo because there's a lot of perspective going on, but I think this height looks about right. So now I'll press S and we'll scale that in to about right there. Now we need to round off the side. So what I'll do is add an edge loop down the middle and just scale it up. So let's press Ctrl and R right through the center, left click, and we'll drag that down a little bit since it looks like it's a little flatter up top and then it rounds off more toward the bottom. And now let's press S and we'll scale that up to match the same shape as the reference photo, and then left click. So that looks about right to me. And now let me rotate the view so I can see the bottom here, and I'll select these three vertices and press F. Those are the three vertices in the front, and then select those two and press F all the way through until the entire bottom is faced up like that. Now while the pummel at the bottom is round, the handle shape itself is oblong. But right now we have it perfectly circular, so we're going to have to squash that a little bit now. So let me press numpad 3 for side view, and let me center this. And I'll press Z for wireframe, and then press A to deselect everything. Now let's press B, and left click and drag over all these vertices. So we're going to be scaling this just on the Y-axis to squash it and create that oblong shape. So let's press S, and then Y to scale it on the Y-axis, and then type in the value 0.75, and then press Enter. So that scaled it on the Y-axis to a value of 0.75 and creates that oblong shape for us. Nice. And now let's press numpad 1 for front view. We'll zoom into the pommel. Let's round off this area right here. So let's add an edge loop by pressing Ctrl and R right through the middle there, then left click and right click to keep it in place. Now press S to scale it in, and that's nice and round there. So let's press numpad 3 for side view now. And we're going to need to scale it in on the Y-axis a little bit as well to create more of a roundness on the side. So I'll press S and then Y. Scale it in a little bit until we have a nice roundness there. All right, that looks good from front view and side view. All right, now what we'll do is create the actual ridges for the handle. So let me press the Z key for wireframe, and then let's go into edge select mode by going down into the menu here and clicking on edge select. Now let's hold Alt, right click on that edge loop right there, then hold Alt and Shift, and we'll right click on that one, that, and that. Now what we're going to do is bevel all of these edge loops to create the amount of geometry we need to actually create these ridges. So let me zoom into the top one here, and I'll press the T key for the left side menu because we're going to need that operator menu. So let's press Ctrl and B to activate the bevel tool and scale that up until it's the right height of those ridges. So somewhere around right there looks good. Then I'll left click. Now let's create a couple of edge loops in the middle of that by going over to the operator menu and increasing the number of segments to 3 so we have 2 edge loops in the center. Now let's press T to get rid of that menu, and let's switch back to vertex select mode in the menu down there. And let's hold Alt, right click on that edge loop, hold Alt and Shift, and we'll right click on all of the middle edge loops now, all the way down for each ridge. Now let me zoom in, and in order to shrink all of these in, we simply press Alt and S, and we'll shrink them in for us, and we'll just shrink it into the amount that looks right to us. So I think that looks good. All right, cool. Now, if you're not familiar with the shrink tool, let me just demonstrate real quickly why I chose to press Alt and S to shrink these in instead of simply pressing S to scale them in. So let me duplicate that. I'll go into top view and I'll stretch it wide. So when you're dealing with non-circular or non-symmetrical shapes, and you simply press the S tool or the S key to scale things in normally, you can see the length of that edge is nowhere near the same as the length of that edge. However, if I go and press Alt and S, you can see that all of these vertices are being shrunken in proportionally, so all of these edges have pretty much the same length. So because we're working with an oblong handle, that's why I chose to press Alt and S to shrink things in instead of scale them. All right, moving on. Let's zoom into the top of the handle here. I'll press Z for wireframe, and you can see that the handle dips in right there and then fans out a little bit at the top. So we already have our top edge loop in place. Let's add another one in by pressing Ctrl and R through there, left click, and we'll drag it up to right there, and then left click. And now let's press Alt and S to shrink it in again, and just match it up with the photo like that, and then left click. All right, that looks good. Let's go into side view. Looks good there too. Now we're going to be doing some work on the front of the handle that is also on the back of the handle. So instead of doing that work twice, what I'm going to do is just delete the back half and mirror the front to the back. So let me press numpad 3 for side view, and I'll zoom out like that. I'll press A to deselect everything, and then I'll press Z for wireframe. Let's press the B key, and I'll left click and drag over all the right side vertices like that. Then I'll press X and delete the vertices. So we should be left with this half a slice of a handle. So let's add that mirror modifier in now. So let's go over to the modifier buttons here, click on add modifier and select mirror. Now let's turn off X and turn on Y, and that's going to mirror it from front to back for us, and we're good to go. So let's create that flat spot at the top of the handle now. So I'll press numpad 1 for front view, then press Z for wireframe. So you can see the flat spot in the photo right there. And the first thing we'll do is select the top 5 middle vertices that are in the middle of that flat spot. I'll press X and I'll delete them. Now let's select these 3 vertices and press F, and then these 3 and press F. So we're just going to create a hole where that area is and just get the general shape going, and then we'll face up the whole middle. Now let me select these 3 vertices. I'll press G twice to edge slide them all the way down to about right here, then left click, and I'll select that vertex, and we'll round off the bottom by pressing G twice, and we'll slide that down to there. All right, now let's select these 3 vertices and press F. Now let's select those 2 and press F up to the top. Now if I tab out of edit mode, you can see the area is not perfectly flat. Now there's a handful of ways to flatten this manually, but you can also flatten this automatically with an add-on. Let's do it that way. So let's go into the File menu, go down to User Preferences, and over on the Add-ons tab, in the search field here, type in Loop, and the Loop Tools add-on pops up. So make sure you check the box next to it to enable that. And we can close that, and let me tab back into edit mode, and I'll select all the vertices of the flat spot there. Then I'll press the W key for the special menu, and there's a new menu at the top called Loop Tools. From that menu, select Flatten. And I'll tab out of edit mode, and you can see that it flattened the whole area for us. So now we're pretty much done with the low poly version of the handle, and from here on we're going to be creating high details or high resolution details for it that we don't want to include on the low poly version. So let's duplicate this and move it to another layer. So let me press tab to get out of edit mode, and I'll press Shift and D to duplicate it, and then right click to keep it in place. Now I'll press the M key to move it to a new layer, and I'll move it to the second layer. Now let's select our original handle. I'll press the T key for the left side toolbar and choose smooth shading for this. I'll press T to get rid of that. Now let's tab back into edit mode, and the first thing we'll do is cap the top. So let me select those 2 vertices there and press F twice to face it to the middle. Now what we're going to do is use the bevel modifier to create some nice detailed bevels for us on all the ridges, and we're going to use the subsurf modifier as well to make sure everything's nice and smooth. So now let's go over to the modifiers and add in a bevel modifier. Now by default the limit method is set to none. That means it's going to be beveling every single edge. That's why it's giving us this very faceted look. We want just bevels around the ridges and a few other points. So what we're going to do is set the limit method to weight. And that's going to allow us to apply weight to the individual edges that we actually want to bevel. So let me tab back into edit mode, and let's switch to edge select mode. So let's go down into the 3D header and click on that icon to switch over to edge select. And let me hold Alt and right click on that edge loop, then hold Alt and Shift, and I'll right click on all of those, And what we're doing now is just selecting all the edges that we actually want to bevel. Now I'll hold Shift and right click on that one. And now we'll go down and select each of the individual edge loops around the ridges. So I'll hold Alt and Shift, and I'll right click on all of these down the line. And I'll also select that edge loop and these as well. All right, so those are all the edges that I want to bevel. So now let's press the N key for the right side toolbar, scroll all the way up to the top, and under Edges Data, there's a mean bevel weight option. So let's increase that to 1, and that adds a full bevel weight to all of those selected edges. So now our bevel modifier is actually beveling all the edges we just selected. So things are getting a bit more definition now, but we still have a little work to do. So right now I think the beveling is too wide. You can see that these bevels here are way too soft. So let's decrease the bevel width down to 0.01. And that makes tighter bevels for us, but we also need more segments. It's not very high resolution there. So I'll increase the number of segments up to 2. All right, that's looking much better already. So we're done with the bevel modifier. Now we need to smooth everything out by adding a subsurf modifier. So I'll click on Add Modifier and add a subdivision surface modifier. And I'll increase the subdivisions to 2 or 3. I'm going to increase it to 3. I'll make sure to increase the render level to 3 as well. And there we go. So let me just double check everything from top to bottom. Make sure all the bevels look nice. And they do. I'm kind of tired of looking at the gray, so I'm going to enable a matte cap. So while I'm in shaded view, in the right side toolbar, let's scroll down and enable matte caps there. Then I'll click on that icon there, and we have a list of matte caps here. I'm going to select this one here. This is very nice to look at. Then I'll press the N key and get rid of that toolbar. And now we're going to work on that little ridge toward the bottom of the pummel there. Now, because we'll be scaling circles up and down, it's probably just going to be easier if we apply the mirror modifier. That way we're not dealing with half circles the whole time. So let me get out of edit mode, and I'll click on apply on the mirror modifier. Now let's tab back into edit mode. I'll press numpad 1 for front view, and let's add an edge loop right through the middle here. Let me switch back to vertex select mode in the header down there, and I'll press Ctrl and R, and left click through the middle there, and then right click to keep it in place. And let me press S, and I'll scale that in a little bit as well to keep that curvature going. Now let me zoom in, and let's press Ctrl and R through there, left click, and we'll drag it up right underneath the other edge loop. And left click to place it there. Then press S, and we'll scale that in like that. And now let's add a hard edge there by surrounding these with other edge loops. So I'll press Ctrl and R through there, left click, and I'll drag it up to there. And now press Ctrl and R down here, left click, and we'll drag it up to right there. And let's see how that looks so far. So it's looking pretty good. We could probably soften that up a little bit. So let me go back into front view and zoom in. I'll hold Alt, right click on that edge loop, and I'll press G twice, and I'll slide it that way a little. And let's hold Alt and right click on the inner edge loop right there, and I'll press S, and I'll scale that in for a bigger dip, for a bigger crease. And that's looking better. Now let's sharpen up this bevel right here. So I'll press Ctrl and R there, left click, and I'll drag it up to there. All right, something like that looks pretty good. And yeah, I think that's about all we need to do with that. So with that out of the way, now we'll work on the bottom of the pummel by creating just a hint of a tang that sticks out at the bottom. Now let's select all the vertices on the bottom by holding Alt, right click on that edge loop, then hold Alt and Shift and right click on that one. Now let's go into bottom view by pressing Ctrl and numpad 7. And let me zoom in and center this. Now let's press E to extrude these, and then immediately press S to scale that extrusion in. Now the middle two faces are going to be the size and shape of the tang, so I think that looks about right to me. I'll left click there. Now let me press the N key for the right side toolbar, and I'll scroll up to the top, and I'll decrease the mean bevel weight to 0. Some of those edges had a bevel weight because they were being extruded from other edges that had a bevel weight, so it just maintained the same bevel weight as their parent edges. So some of these edges were being actually beveled by that modifier. We didn't need it, so I just turned that down to 0. Let me press the N key to get rid of that. Now, like I said, these middle two faces are the tang. So let's square that off by selecting these two vertices. Now press S to scale them in until the ends are nice and flat. Just like that. And let me select all of these vertices now. I'll press X and erase the faces. So you can see our tang right now is actually kind of oblong. I want to sharpen up the corners a little bit. So we can do that by adding some knife cuts. Let me press the K key, and I'll click on that vertex and then click on that vertex and press enter. And it makes a knife cut through there, adding extra vertices right near the corners, and that sharpens things up a little bit. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. Press K for the knife tool, click on that vertex, click on that one, and then press enter. There we go. Now we're going to be using a tool called inset, and what that does is it extrudes all of our vertices inward proportionally, but it doesn't work on gaps. So we're going to need to face this back up. The only reason I deleted those faces in the first place is to see how square our corners were so that we could fix that. So let me hold Alt, right click on that edge loop there, and I'll press the F key to create an end gun. And I actually think it might be a little bit too thick anyway, so let me scale that in. I'll press S and then Y and reshape that a little bit to be more rectangular. All right, I think that looks good. Now we need to restore the topology in the middle because I don't want a big end gun there. I want to work with quads. So what I can do is select these two vertices and press J, and it'll create an edge between them. Then I'll select these two and press J, creates an edge between them, but also an extra vertex upon any edges it intersects. This is a really cool tool. So now I'll select those two and press J, and there we go. We have a nice rectangle of quads now. So now let me press B, and I'll left click and drag over all those vertices there, and now we can get started on the tang. So now to activate the inset tool, we press the I key, and you can see everything's being extruded in proportionally around each side. So I'll extrude that inward to right there, and then left click. So the faces I have selected now are actually going to be the end of the tang, but we have to make it look like it's coming out of the pummel. So to do that, we'll add a couple of edge loops through here, and then we'll push one of them up and into the pummel. So I'll press Ctrl and R, and while I'm hovered over that area, I'll scroll up on the mouse until I have two cuts like that, then left click and right click to keep them in the middle. Now let's hold Alt, right click on that edge right there to select that loop. Then I'll rotate the view, and we'll press G and then Z, and move that up on the Z axis into the pummel like that, and then left click. All right, I think that's a good depth, maybe just a little bit more up on the Z axis, and that looks good. And now let me press Ctrl numpad 7 for bottom view. I'll press A to deselect those vertices. Now I'll press B and left click and drag over those vertices right there, and just those vertices. So this is the tang, and we're going to make it protrude just a little bit more by rotating the view. Then I'll press G and then Z and move it down a little bit so it's sticking out a touch. And let me press B, and I'll middle click and drag over them to deselect, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. And then I'll press G and then Z and move this down a little bit, just to round off the ends a little so they're not so squared. All right, I think that looks good. But I want to tighten up, I want some tighter bevels around the rim of this thing. So what I'll do is press Ctrl and R right through there to add a loop cut, left click, and then to align it with the bottom edges, I'll press E. And you should see a red dot at the bottom. If for some reason you see it at the top, what you can do is press the F key to switch direction. So make sure the red dot's at the bottom. That means it's aligned with those edges, and we'll bring that down for a sharper bevel to right there. All right, there it is. And that'll do it for the tang. Cool. And that actually does it for the whole handle. All right, with the handle out of the way, let's move on to the handguard at the top of that. And first I'll center the cursor. So let's press Shift and S and choose cursor to center. And now I'll press numpad 7 for top view, and make sure you're in object mode because we want this to be a separate object. And now I'll press Shift and A and add in a mesh circle. And then I'll immediately press the T key, and let's change the number of vertices down a little bit lower to 26. And then press T to get rid of that. Now tab into edit mode, and we'll press S to scale these down so that they're just a little bit bigger than the top of the handle there. And now let's press numpad 1 for front view. And I'll press G and then Z, and we'll sit that right on top of the handle, like that. Now press G and X, and we'll move it all the way over here to match up with the end on the photo there. Now let's press numpad 7 for top view, and press A to deselect everything, and then press B, and left click and drag over all the left side vertices. Then press X and delete the vertices. Now I want to mirror this to the other side, so let's add in a mirror modifier. And I'll press the Z key for wireframe to make sure it mirrors over there correctly. And now let's select these two vertices here, and I'll press numpad 1 for front view. Then press E and X to extrude it over to the left, right where that handguard starts to bend, and then drop it there. And now in order to get these to merge in the middle, we're going to turn on the clipping option in the mirror modifier. That makes it so when they reach the center, it just stops right there and it merges with the other side. Let me cancel that. So now we're going to extrude this to the center. So I'll press E and then X to extrude it to the left, right to the middle until they collide, and then I'll left click there. All right, now let's face this area up. So I'm going to select the end two vertices there. And I'll just keep pressing F until it faces it up to the center. Now let's press numpad 1 for front view. I'll press Z to go into wireframe and then press A to deselect everything. Now we're going to bend this. So I'll press B and left click and drag over all those vertices. And I want to bend this around these vertices right here. So what I'll do is I'll hold shift. I'll right click on that vertex to deselect it, then right click on it again to select it. You can see that it's highlighted now. That makes it the active selection, and now we can rotate around that. So let me press numpad 1 for front view again. And down in the header here, in the pivot point menu, let's switch it over to active element. That means it's going to allow us now to rotate or scale based on the position of our active selection. So now just press R and we'll rotate that about 8 or 9 degrees to match the blueprints. And then I'll left click to place it there. All right, let's go back down to the menu now and we'll switch that back to bounding box. I actually think medium point is default, but in most scenarios, there's not too much of a difference between the two. They're both pretty standard. So I just like switching it to bounding box because the hotkey for that is simply the comma key, so it's very easy to press. And now let's add some thickness to this. So go over to the modifiers, click add modifier and add in a solidify. This is going to automatically add some thickness to our object. So now we just need to match it up with the photo here. So it looks like we'll need a negative value. So I'm just going to decrease that until it matches the photo. So it looks like a value of negative 0.05 is perfect for that. All right, there we go. And now what we'll do is soften up this bend right here. So let me hold Alt, right click on that edge there. And let me just rotate the view a little bit like this. Actually, let's go in front view. So I'll press numpad 1 and I'll press Ctrl and B to bevel this, to soften it up to match the photo like that. Now press Z for wireframe, and it only created one segment for us. So let me press the T key, and we have our operator menu over here. Let's increase the number of segments to 3, I think looks good. Yeah, that looks fine to me. All right, let me tab out of edit mode, and I'll choose smooth shading for this in the left side toolbar, and then press T to get rid of that. So now we just need to bevel the edges to make this look nice and detailed. So let me add in a bevel modifier. And we'll set this, because right now it's beveling every single edge. So we'll set this to angle. So any angle above 30 degrees will be beveled. And it looks like by default, that is beveling every edge I wanted to. Let's increase the number of segments to 3. And see how that looks. All right, that's looking pretty good to me. Now we're pretty much done with the low poly version of this. So let me press Shift and D to duplicate it, right click to keep it in place. Then I'll press the M key and move it to the second layer with our other low poly objects. Now let's select this, and to make this a little bit more high resolution, I'll go to add modifier and select subdivision surface. And we'll set that to level 2. All right, so this piece is finished now. All right, now let's press numpad 1 for front view, and it's not quite centered over the handle piece right here. So I'm going to hold Shift and then press number 2 on the number row to enable both the first and second layer. Then I'll right click there to select that object, hold Shift and right click to select the other one. So we have the low and high poly objects selected now. I'm going to move these over to the left a little bit. So I'll press G and then X. Just move it over to the left until it's pretty much centered on top of the handle there. And then press Enter. All right, now press 1 on the number row to go back to the first layer. And now we can get started on the knife blade. Now to start on the blade, let's make sure the cursor is centered again. So I'll press Shift and S and choose cursor to center yet again. And now let's press Shift and A while we're in object mode, and we'll add in a new mesh plane. Now press Tab to go into edit mode, and I'll press Z for wireframe, then I'll press S to scale that down, and then G to move it into place. Right like that. So I'm scaling it up to the size of the knife in the reference photo, and just moving it right on top of the hand guard like that. And now let's add a couple of edge loops for the edges we know for the edges we can see on the photo reference. So I'll press Ctrl and R right around there to create a vertical loop cut. Then left click and I'll drag it right there where the knife starts dipping down for the point. And let me press Ctrl and R right there to get a horizontal loop cut. I'll left click there and I'll place it right there for the bottom edge of this. And we'll add one right above that as well. So let's press Ctrl and R through here again, left click, and we'll drag this down to right about there. and then left click. All right, let me press Ctrl and up for full screen. I don't think we'll need any modifiers for a little while. And let me zoom out a little bit. Then I'll hold Alt and right click on that edge there to select all those vertices. Then I'll press G and then Z, and I'll move it up to right about there, right where this starts separating right here. And now I'll press E to extrude it and then Z to move it on the Z axis, and I'll extrude it up to right there because we have a directional change here. And then we'll extrude it up again to this point right here. So press E and then Z and extrude it up to right there. Now we can start, since everything's coming inward to a point, we got to start moving these vertices around. So I'll select that vertex and simply press G twice to slide it along the edge sideways and then match up with the photo reference like that. Same thing with this. I'll select that, press G twice and slide it to the right, right at that intersection right here. And then this, we'll press G twice and slide it over to the edge of the blade. All right, so that's looking good, but we need some edges coming down this line right here. So I'll use the knife tool for that. So I'll press the K key, left click on that vertex there, drag it down to that edge, and click on that edge while we're following the guide of the reference photo. And then let's bring it down to that vertex, make sure it highlights, left click on it, and then press enter. All right, so off to a good start with that. All right, so we're gonna need to add some extra edge loops in this area here to round this off. So let me press Ctrl and R right through there, and then I'll scroll up on the mouse until I have 4 cuts, and then left click, and then right click to keep them in the middle. And do the same thing on the other side. Now let's join these together. So select 2 vertices at a time and press the J key, and it'll create an edge between them, and do that all the way down. All right, now I want to move these vertices right to the edge of the knife there, but as you can see, the ones down here are a little bit off. It's because our reference photo isn't perfectly straight. It's not perfectly aligned. So what I'm going to do is select all of these vertices by pressing B for the box select, just left click and drag over them all. Then I'll zoom in up here. I'll press G and then X, and I'll move that into alignment with the reference photo there, just so we can more easily follow along the knife's edge as we're shaping this. And the same thing on the right side. This is a little bit off. So I'll select that. And actually an easy way to select a whole line of vertices is to select one, hold Control, and then right click on the other one. It selects the whole line of vertices in between them. So with all of them selected, I'll zoom in up here, press G and then X, and I'll move that to the right side of the blade like that. And we're a little bit off on this edge right here as well. So I'll do the same thing, select that, hold Control, select the bottom vertex, then we'll zoom in up here, press G and then X, and move it into alignment like that. And let's hold Alt, right click on that edge right there to select the whole loop of it. And we're going to make this aligned with that edge right there. So I'll press G and then Z and move it down until that's aligned. All right, so now we can go up here and start shaping things. So let's select one vertex at a time on the left side. I'll press G and then X and move it to match up with the photo. And we'll do that all the way up the line. Now we'll do the same thing with the inner vertices right here, but we can use edge slide for this, or vertex slide. So I'll select that vertex, then press G twice and slide it over into place like that. And we'll do that all the way up the line. Now let's work on the next set of edges or set of vertices, and we'll do the same thing. Just select one, press G twice, and slide it over the blueprint line. It's a little bit more faint on this side, so just kind of guessing and making sure we just have a nice smooth curve all the way up like that. Now let's go to the right side here, and looks like that's in place, and that is too. I'll select this one, press G twice, slide it to the left, and I'll do that all the way up. All right, there we go. So just take a look at your curves now, make sure they're all nice and smooth. I think they look good enough. Maybe I'll take that one, press G, move it to the right just a touch. All right, that looks good. All right, let's add some dimension to this now. So what I'll do is select all the vertices that are going to be part of the thick part of the blade. So let me press A to deselect everything. Then I'll press the C key for circle select, and I'll left click and drag over all of these vertices right here. And let me zoom down here because I also want to select that vertex and that one there. Whoops, and that corner. All right, so with all these vertices selected, let's go into side view by pressing numpad 3. And now we're going to add some thickness, but we're going to keep in mind that we're going to mirror this to the other side. So I'm going to zoom in real far until the grid gets really tiny. And then I'll press G, hold Control, and move it to the left. I'm going to move it to the left 0.05. And then left click. And let's make sure that's the right thickness. So I'm going to press Ctrl and up to get out of full screen. And I'll add in a mirror modifier. And this will be mirrored on the Z-axis. All right, that definitely looks like the right thickness to me. All right, let me tab back into edit mode. And I'll press the Z key for wireframe view and then press numpad 1 for front view. We're going to add an extra edge loop in here for this edge right there. So let me press Ctrl and R right through there to add an edge loop. I'll left click and then I'll press the E key to align it with the left side edges. And we'll drag that to match the thickness in the photo. Actually, I think I want mine to be a little bit thicker. So I'll bring it out to there and then left click. Yeah, I think that looks good. And now let's hold shift and I'll right click on that and that to deselect them. We're going to have to go into top view and pull this down in order to create a difference in angle there. So now I'll press numpad 7 for top view, then press the Z key for shaded view. And I'll zoom in. Now I'll press G and then Y, and we'll move it down like that until we have the right sharpness we want. I think that looks about right. And I'll left click there. And how's that looking? Cool. There we go. Not bad, not bad. All right, let me tab back into edit mode. Now our back edge right here comes to a point, but it's actually a little bit rounded right here. It has some thickness. So let me select that vertex, hold Control and select that one to select them all. Then I'll press numpad 7 for top view, and we'll move this down a little. So let me zoom in. I'll press G and then Y, and I'll hold Control and Shift for very tiny incremental movements like that. And we'll move that down 0.006. Looks good to me. And I'll left click to confirm that. And let me take a look. So that looks better. All right, let me press numpad 1 for front view, and I'll tab back into edit mode. Now we're going to work on the top of the knife here. And we'll start on the rim over here, the knife's edge. So let me select these two vertices, and I'm going to extrude these up 6 times to the tip. And I can actually do that in a very easy way that also rotates the vertices along the curve that we're extruding. And you can do that by simply holding Control and then left clicking along the knife's edge like that. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to have to space these out, but at least we got things planted down. And now let's flatten this up here. So I'll press R and I'll rotate that until it's flat. Then press G and move it into place over here. Let me select the top vertex. I'll press G and then Z and move it up, just to give it the same width as the rest of the knife's edge. And now we can space these out a little bit more evenly. Now remember that Loop Tools add-on? Well, that also has a spacing option, which can automatically space these vertices out for us. So let me select that vertex, hold Control, select the top one. Then press W, and in the Loop Tools special menu, select Space. That will space them out evenly along that curve for us. And we'll do the same thing with the vertices below that. And there we go. Now they get a little stretch down here. These are pointing down, but we're going to have these edges going over to the right. So let me select that. I'll press G twice and slide it up just a little bit. I'll do the same thing for this. And maybe for that. Now let's just make sure that all of these are following the knife's edge. So I'll select those two vertices, press G, and move them to the right a little bit. Alright, now let's select this vertex, hold Shift and select that one, and press F to create an edge between them. Now if you go into side view, you can see that's going down toward the tip for us now. And let's go back into front view. Now let's create 5 vertices in here to match up with the vertices over there. So I'll press Ctrl and R, hover over that, and then scroll up on my mouse until I have 5 cuts, and then left click. And now let's get all of these into place. So I'll select each one, press G and then X, and move it over onto the reference photo. Alright, let me zoom out, and now I'll select these bottom vertices right there and press F all the way up until it connects to the top. And now we just need some vertices down the right side. So with that vertex selected, I'll hold Shift and select that one and then press F to create an edge. And then press Ctrl and R. Actually, before we do that, let's make sure that's straight. Let me press numpad 3 for side view. So we should have a straight edge right there. But as you can see, mine is going off to the left just slightly. So what I'm going to do is I'll select that vertex, hold Control, then select that one. I'll select the entire line of vertices, and it makes this the last selection, so it becomes the active selection. Now let's go down into the pivot point menu and set active element as the pivot point. That's going to allow us to scale and rotate around our active selection. So I'll press numpad 3 for side view, and we're going to flatten this out by scaling it on the Y-axis. So I'll press S, and as it's scaling in toward my active selection, I'll press the Y key to constrain it to the Y-axis, then hold Control, and scale it all the way into the active selection down to 0, and then left click. So now we have a perfectly flat line. All right, let me press numpad 1 for front view. And let's add 5 vertices in here the same way we did over here. So I'll press Ctrl and R, scroll up on the mouse until I have 5 cuts, then left click. And I'll just go through and I'll line these up with a reference photo. Well, it looks like we're a little bit to the left of the edge of the reference photo, so I'll just follow that as a guide all the way up. So I'll press G and then X, move to the left a little bit, and we'll do that all the way up the line. Now these top 2 vertices here should be a straight edge. So I don't want this going into the left there, so I'm going to select that, press G and move it to the right a little bit. And same thing with this. And let's zoom out and see our curve. It looks pretty good. I'll select that, move it to the right a little bit. And there we go. That looks good. Now let me select these 2 vertices there and press F all the way up to the top. All right. Now it's looking like a knife. All right. Let me tab back into edit mode and press numpad 1 for front view. Let's add a couple of extra edge loops through here so we can round off this straight line there. So I'll press Ctrl and R through there, scroll up on the mouse till I have 2 cuts should be fine. And I'll left click and right click to keep them in place. And now let me press the Z key for wireframe. Well, right now we have an end gun over here. There's more than 4 vertices to that face. So what I'll do is press the K key for the knife tool, click on that vertex, and then to get a straight line, I'll press the C key. And I'll just drag that over here, left click, and press enter. So that gives us a quad up there and a triangle shape down here, but it's got 4 vertices, so technically it's a quad. All right, and now we need to round this off a little bit, so I'll select these 2 vertices. I'll press G and then X. I'll move it to the left to round it off like that. And let me select all the vertices so I can better see the curve. And that looks good enough to me. All right, now what we'll do is actually extrude this in toward the middle to give this some thickness. So let me enable clipping on the mirror modifier. So when we extrude these vertices to the middle, they'll actually collide and merge together. And let me select that vertex at the bottom. Then I'll zoom in to the top and I'll hold Control and select that vertex there. So that'll select that whole line of vertices except the top one. Now let me rotate the view. And then I'll press E to extrude and then Y to extrude on the Y axis and extrude it all the way over to the center like that and then left click. And now let me select these 3 vertices there and press F. Let me just double check, make sure everything looks good down the whole line, and it does. Now we'll swing over to this side and we can make a quad right here. So let me select that vertex, press E and then Y, bring it to the center and left click. And then I'll select these 4 vertices and press F. All right, now I want to create more of a wedge shape here, more of a triangle. So I'm going to move these vertices along that edge loop up to meet up with the vertices above them, and I want them to merge together. So let me press A to deselect everything, then I'll press numpad 1 for front view, and then press Z for wireframe. First we'll select the vertices, so let's press B, and left click and drag over all those vertices right there. We're going to slide them up and have them merge with the ones above it. To have them automatically merge, let's enable this option in the 3D header called Auto Merge. So I'll click on that. And now once this vertex gets on top of that one, they'll merge together into one. So I'll press G twice, slide them all the way up, and then left click there. You can see now there's just one vertex there. Now that creates a little bit of a problem over here because this is dipping downward. So all we have to do is select these 2 vertices and press G and then Z, move it up until that's nice and flat. Now let me zoom out a little bit. And let's hold Alt and right click on that bottom edge loop right there. Let's move this down into the handle. So I'll press G and then Z, move it down until it intersects. And let's tab out of edit mode, and that pretty much does it for the low poly version of the knife. From here we're going to start creating more high resolution details for it, but first we'll make a duplicate and move it to the second layer to use as our low poly final game model. So let's press Shift and D to duplicate it, right click to keep it in place, and then press M and move it to the second layer. Now let's right click on this model to select it, and let's go over to the mirror modifier and click on the eye to make it invisible for the time being. So we're just working with half of it. Let's tab into edit mode now, and what we're going to do is use a bevel modifier to add some bevels to some of these edges. And just like we did before, we're going to select individual edges and add bevel weight to them so that we can pick and choose which edges we want beveled. So let's go down into the 3D header here and click on the edge select icon there so we're working with edges. Now let's go over to the modifiers and add in a bevel modifier. Let's increase the segments to 2 and we'll change the limit method to weight. Now we're going to go through and select all the edges that we want to bevel. So we'll start over here. I'll right click on that edge, hold Shift, right click on that one, then hold Alt and Shift, and we'll right click on all of these edge loops right there. That should go all the way up to the tip, well almost. So let's hold Alt and Shift. We'll right click on those edge loops. That one. That and that. And let's not forget the one edge up here at the tip. So I'll hold Shift and right click on that one. And I think that's all of them. Yeah, that looks good. And now I'll press the N key, and in the right side toolbar at the top, increase the mean bevel weight to 1. And then I'll press N to get out of that menu. Now let's press Tab to get out of edit mode, and we'll zoom in and check out our bevels. They're looking pretty good, but we need to smooth shade it. So I'll press the T key and choose smooth shading. Alright, so far so good. Now we're going to really smooth everything out by adding a subsurf modifier. So click on Add Modifier and add in a subdivision surface. And we'll crank up the levels to 2 or 3. I'm going to go with 3, and I'll make sure I change both levels to the same number. And now that is super smooth. It does create a little bit of a problem down here. You can see these faces are stretching. All we need to do to fix that is add a couple of edge loops surrounding these details in order to kind of contain everything in that area. So let me tab back into edit mode. I'll press Ctrl and R through here. Now you can't really see where the edge loop is. It was up and out of screen. You could have just left clicked and trusted that it was there, but I just wanted to show you where it is. So I'll press Ctrl and R to add that loop cut. Left click and I'll drag it down close to those details. And I'll drop it there. Now let me zoom in, and I'll press the Z key for wireframe. Now, what we need to do is make sure that we keep this edge away from where the beveling is happening in this area. So I'll press G twice for edge slide, and I'll bring this down. And as I get closer to the beveled area, you can see the bevels everywhere are getting tighter. That's because the bevel modifier tries to make sure that those bevels it creates don't overlap with surrounding edges. So we're going to need to pull this back up until it's no longer affecting the bevel. So right about there looks good. And I'll left click and place it there. We'll do the same thing on the bottom here. I'll press Ctrl and R to add a loop cut, left click and drag it up until it starts affecting the bevel, and then I'll pull it back down until it's no longer affecting it, and I'll drop it there. And now that fixed up all the details in the area, and everything's looking nice and clean. Alright, let me tab back into edit mode, and now I want to work with these edges right here, and I want to get them to be nice and sharp. So let me right click on that edge there. I'll go all the way up to the top, hold Control and right click on that edge, and it'll select all those edges for me. And now I'll press the End key for the right side toolbar, because now what we need to do is tell subsurfing not to smooth out that edge there. So at the top of this right side toolbar is a mean crease value. If we increase that to 1, you can see it negates the subsurfing effect, and we now have a nice sharp angle there. The only problem is, as we go down toward the bottom, it starts to fan out a little bit. So we're going to need to go down one more edge. So let me hold Shift, right click on that edge, and we'll increase the mean crease to 1 for all the edges. So now we have some nice perfect vertical lines there. Now if you tab out of edit mode, you can see it's almost sharp there. Everything is still being set smooth. So what we need to do is tell Blender that we want a perfectly sharp edge right here. Now let's go over to the object data buttons over here and enable a tool called Auto Smooth. Now this tool allows us to do two things. One, it will smooth any angle below the angle number you put in this field. And two, it will allow us to mark individual edges as sharp, and Blender will shade them as perfectly sharp no matter what their angle is. And that's what we want. So let's change the angle in this to 180 degrees. That way it's smoothing the entire model except edges that we mark as sharp. So now let me tab back into edit mode, and let me hold Shift and right click on the bottom edge there to deselect it, so that just all of these edges along the blade are selected. And then I'll press Ctrl and E for the edge menu, and I'll choose Mark Sharp. And let's press Tab to get out of edit mode, press the Z key for shaded view, and you can see that's now being shaded as a perfectly sharp edge. All the way up. Well, almost all the way up, but we'll fix that later. Alright, let me tab back into edit mode, and now what I want to do is make sure that once we mirror this, that the subsurf modifier isn't going to smooth out our blade right there. So let me hold Alt and right click on that edge there, and it selects the loop all the way around. And it selects some extra vertices like these right here, but since that's in a flat area, it's not going to matter if we crease that and don't have subsurfing smoothing, because it's already flat. So let's increase the mean crease value to 1. And now let's pan up to the top to where we had that shading issue, where that sharp edge wasn't going all the way up to the tip. We need some more geometry to work with up here, so I'm going to actually apply the bevel modifier so we get those extra edges. Let me tab out of edit mode because you can't apply a modifier while in edit mode. And let's go over to the modifiers now, and we'll click Apply on Bevel. Now it gives us a little error up here telling us the modifier wasn't first, but that's okay because we wanted the bevel modifier to be applied before we mirror everything. So now we can tab into edit mode, and you see we have some extra edges to work with now. So now all we need to do is right click on that edge there. We'll add some creasing to it, then press Ctrl and E and mark it as sharp. And let's press tab to get out of edit mode, and there we go. Nice. Now while we're at it, let's select these two edges there and increase the crease for them to 1 as well. And now let's press numpad 1 for front view, and I'll tab out of edit mode and I'll hold shift and press 2 on the number row to bring up our second layer with our low poly knife. We're going to try and match the pointiness of this knife right now. So let me tab back into edit mode of our high poly object. We'll go down into the header and we'll go back to vertex select mode. And let's select that vertex there. I'll press G and then Z, move it up to match the shape of our low poly knife, then select that vertex and do the same thing. And there we go. All right, let me press 1 on the number row. So we're just in the first layer and everything is looking great so far. All right, now let's go enable visibility of the mirror modifier and double check things. We're looking pretty good. We still need to mark the very edge of the knife blade as sharp though. So let's tab into edit mode, right click on that top vertex right there, and then let's pan down to the bottom. Hold Control and right click on that edge right, or that vertex right there. And now press Control and E and mark them all as sharp. And there we go. Nice. And this sharpness doesn't come down quite as far as it could. So let me tab back into edit mode. I'll select those two vertices, press Control and E, and mark as sharp. There we go. Nice. Alright, so we're actually almost finished the knife. We just need to create those blood grooves in the sides of it. So let me press numpad 1 for front view, and make sure you're in shaded view for this, and then just simply left click on that surface right there. What happens is while you're in shaded view, if you click on a surface, it's going to place the 3D cursor right on top of that surface. So that's going to help us align a circle that we add with this surface to make sure that everything remains flat. So now let's press tab to go into edit mode, and I'll press shift and A, and I'll add in a circle. Then I'll immediately press the T key, and in the operator menu, I'll change the number of vertices down to 12. I'll press T to get rid of that. Let me press N to get rid of the right side toolbar as well. And now let me press the Z key for wireframe view. Then I'll press S to scale that down, and then press G to move it up into place on the groove right there. Alright, I think that looks good. Let me make it just a little bit bigger. And we don't want 3 vertices at the top, because that's going to give us a triangle up there. So I want to try and get 4 vertices up there so we can have a quad. So I'll simply press R, hold Control, and rotate it 15 degrees, then left click. Alright, now let's select those 4 vertices, press X and delete those vertices, then press the L key while hovered over those vertices to select them. And now we'll press Shift and D to duplicate, and middle click as we drag down, and then I'll constrain it to the Z axis, and we'll bring it all the way down there. Now I want to mirror this vertically, so I'll press Ctrl and M for the mirror tool, and then I'll press the Z key to mirror it on the Z axis, and then press Enter. Now let's press G and then Z and move it down and into place. And now let's connect this with the top. So I'll select these 2 vertices and press F, and then select those 2 and press F. Now we're going to need to connect all of these vertices to the surrounding edges. The problem is we don't have that many surrounding vertices to connect them to, so we're going to need to add some edge loops in order to make clean connections. So I'm going to press Ctrl and R right through there, and I'll scroll up on the mouse until I have 2 cuts, then I'll left click and right click to keep them in the middle. So these 2 vertices here are going to connect to these 2 vertices there, and the same thing at the bottom. And let me just go up to the top, make sure those edge loops didn't cause any trouble. So we got a weird end gun up here. I don't think it's affecting the shading at all. But if you want, you can just select these 2 vertices, press W, and merge them at the center. At the very least, it just looks a little better like that. Alright, so let me press numpad 1 for front view. So these 2 vertices connect to the top 2 vertices there. So we're going to need some horizontal edge loops now to connect to each one of these side vertices. So let me press Ctrl and R through there, left click, and I'll drag it up to right there to match up with this vertex there. And we'll do that again to that one, and then once more to there. And we'll do the same thing at the bottom. Press Ctrl and R, drag it down to there, and then one there, and then one there. And actually what I think I'll do is add another edge loop right below that right there. So these 2 vertices will connect to those 2. And let's go up to the top and do the same thing, so that these 2 vertices are a little bit closer and they'll connect to those. Alright, so what do we do now? Now let's separate these 2 edge loops until they're on the outside of the channel. So let me hold Alt and I'll right click on that edge loop right there. And let me go up to the top and I'll go into wireframe view by pressing Z, and then I'll press B and middle click and drag over those top vertices so that they don't slide anywhere because they're perfectly fine where they are. Then I'll press Z to go into shaded view and I'll go down here. Then I'll press G twice to activate edge slide, and then I'll press E and then F to align these with the left side edges, and I'll drop that right about there. That looks good. And let's do the same thing with the right edge loop. Hold Alt, right click on that edge loop, go up to the top and go in wireframe, press B, and middle click and drag on them to deselect. We'll go down here, press Z for shaded view, press G twice for edge slide, and then press E and then F to align it with the right side, and we'll drop these right there. Let's make sure everything looks nice and clean all the way up still, and all the way down. Yep, looking good. Now what we'll do is just punch a hole through this thing and then reconnect it with our channel vertices. So let me select that top left vertex right there, then hold Ctrl and Shift for region select, and I'll right click on that bottom right vertex right there, and it selects all of the vertices within that region. Then let's press X and erase the faces. So now we just simply need to face up the gap. So let me select these 4 vertices there and press F. Then I'll select those 2, zoom out, and press F all the way around, and it should connect it with quads all the way. Awesome. Alright, now all we have to do is fill in the gap in here. So let me hold Alt, right click on that edge loop there to select it. And for the time being, let's press the F key to create an n-gon there, just so we can go ahead and start insetting these faces. So now I'll press the I key to inset it. I'll inset it just a little bit like that, so that we have 2 edge loops at the top of the channel, so that we can control the sharpness and the quality of the bevel going into the channel. And now let's press I to inset this again, and this edge loop here is actually going to be the furthest or the deepest part of the channel, so I think I'll bring it down to about right there. And now I'll press numpad 3 for side view, I'll press Z for wireframe, then I'll press G, and I'll just press the right arrow and bring that into the knife as deep as I want this channel to be. I think something like that looks fine. And then press enter. Let's press numpad 1 to go back into front view. And you can see we got some weird shading going on here, so we need some extra geometry in the middle. So I'll press I to inset the faces again down to about right there, and then left click. Let's see how that's looking so far. So that's looking better. But we still have a big n-gon in the middle, so we're going to get rid of that by pressing X and erasing the face. Then I'll select those 2 vertices and press F a bunch of times all the way down to the bottom. There we go. And I still want to round off the rim of this as well. So let me press Ctrl and R to add a loop cut right through there. I'll left click and I'll right click to keep it in place. Then I'll press numpad 3 for side view. Press Z for wireframe. And you can see we have a straight line right there. So I want that to be rounded off. So what I'll do is press G, then press the right arrow and bring that back until that's nice and rounded for me. Just like that. Let's go back into front view, get out of edit mode, and see how it looks. Looks awesome. Alright, now just to make sure that everything looks awesome, let's press the N key for the right side toolbar, go down to the matte caps, click on that, and let's turn this into chrome. I'll press N to get rid of that. That way we can see if there are any flaws whatsoever in the reflections and fix them if we even want to. So everything's looking good up top. Everything's looking good there. We do have a little bit of a shading issue right here at that corner. So let me angle the view like this, press tab to go into edit mode, and all we really need is to surround this area with some more edge loops. So I'm going to press Ctrl and R right there, left click and then right click to keep it in place, and that fixes the vertical shading issue. And what I'll do is select these vertices, I'll press G twice and just simply slide them over, just like that, and that fixes it. Cool. Alright, so that'll do it for this part of the series. Next weekend we'll be working on prepping the low poly knife and UV unwrapping it. If you like these tutorials, don't forget to check out our premium courses on cgmasters.net. Those sales help us do what we do, so thanks for all the support so far, and I'll see you guys next weekend with the next part of this series. If you like this tutorial and you're interested in more comprehensive Blender training, then check out my course, Complete Vehicle Production in Blender. This is a step-by-step guide on the entire creation process of a Jeep Wrangler, including modeling inside and out, creating all the shaders from scratch, and rendering out the final product. Check out the link in the description for more details, and stay tuned for new videos every weekend.